guys. Welcome back to our third episode. As they say, third time is the charm. So, we're about to have a good episode for you tonight or today. Um, we're going to try and do an episode probably every other day. That'll give us one day to do a little bit of planning, put something good together, and we'll try to start our streams around 2 p.m. on the East Coast, so that'll be 11 a.m. on the West Coast. But today, the subject of the show is actually going to be about video game and content addiction, which kind of falls in line. I know we've kind of talked about this slightly over the past two episodes, but I'm joined with my two buddies, Prophet and Devon. And Devon's done well for the last two episodes introducing our concept, so I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to him and let him get us started. We appreciate everyone joining us, and we hope you enjoy.
Thank you again for the introduction, Urban. Yes, so really to just get straight in to the topic, this is something that, as we were going over yesterday and today, it's really kind of all near and dear to our hearts, and I think especially to lots of young men out there, you will relate to this phenomenon. It is content and video game addiction. This is something that I would say since the Minecraft days and early YouTube has plagued, early Gen Z, definitely Gen Alpha with the Fortnite phenomena. It has been around this kind of fixation on YouTube, starting these beginning behaviors, watching this content, getting a feel for it, getting a taste for it, and then eventually that kind of spiraling into full-blown addiction to these things once you get on to the capacity of really playing them and not just being on your mom's phone and getting a computer, getting an Xbox. I think I definitely remember with myself when I was a kid, I would just for some reason, I had this fascination with all things video games, all things Minecraft. It really was a weird transition. I kind of went from Legos in fifth and fourth grade into all of a sudden getting this device in my hand, and that's really what I'm kind of wrapping this into. That is the variable. It's my entire childhood was pretty much completely normal, where I didn't really care about video games. I didn't really think about video games. Granted, video games weren't that big at the time. I mean, this was probably, I'm talking about, early 2010s, 2009. So video games weren't that big at that point. And I had DSs. And that's another interesting point to bring up in all this too. I did have access to video games before my iPhone. I had a DS with multiple different games on it that I never really got addicted to the levels that I got addicted to Minecraft or Call of Duty to. And I think the one big variable here is the black rectangle, right? So, Irvin, Prophet, I'd be pretty interested. Like, how is kind of that beginning addiction for you, and if you had video games before, and how it manifested in the future?
I'll go ahead. You can go ahead, Prophet, and then I'll chime in.
Sure. Well, I had a very similar experience to you. Up until about the age of 10, I was outside climbing trees, playing with friends, going to the park, doing this and that. And I had DSs too. I would play with my siblings, but you're right, it never really reached an addiction point until I was 10 years old and I got almost uninterrupted access to my family's computer. And I was also only going to school about 2 or 3 days a week. So my memories from before 10 are all climbing trees, hanging out with friends, and spending it with family. And all my significant memories after 10 are Minecraft, YouTube, Call of Duty Zombies, finding friends on Discord. It was very, very different. And it did start in YouTube, and it started with Let's Plays from people like Sunday and mod packs, and that got me to beg my mom for Minecraft, and I've spent thousands of hours on Minecraft at this point. So I think it is the black rectangles, whether it be your phone or whether it just be long-term uninterrupted access to a computer. The variable is the black rectangles.
So I'm very much like you guys. I mean, if I'm being completely honest, I think I was Probably playing like those children's like learning video games when I was like 5 or 6, and I think I got my first laptop or something when I might have been 7, and I started very young, and ever since I was about 10, I had played, online games, World of Warcraft, stuff like that. I played with some family members, and it really just became a major theme in my life. So I think we're all on the same page there, but definitely, it's definitely something that is very new in the course of history, and definitely on a stimulation level. I mean, when you have all these flashing lights and dynamics within a game where you're rewarded for doing, for instance, Minecraft, you're rewarded if you go out and spend time collecting resources, but it's a faux sense of stimulation because it does hit the dopamine receptors in your brain, but it's not anything tangible. These are simulated games. So I think that's kind of where this takes a turn, is people have been trained to pursue dopamine stimulation that is fake. That's not actually tangible, or anything that exists in the real world. And our generation was the one that marked the rise of influencers and let's play and gaming as a industry. Not just the people who create or write the games, but the people who play the games and you watch them play the game, which kind of acts as a little bit of marketing, because that's what I did before I bought any game. I would go and watch somebody play a little bit of it, and then I would say, "Hey, this is a cool game," and I would go and I would ask one of my parents to get the game for me. And it really was a major part of my life, and it definitely was for the both of you as well. So we're definitely prepared to speak on this subject.
No, yeah, and I think it's very interesting how you just left it off too, because it's exactly where I wanted to go with it. So one very important factor that we didn't really just gloss over, that we did gloss over, to be completely honest, was the difference. And the reason why we didn't get crazy addicted to these DS games was because of the online capability that came with, after like really 2013, when the first iPhones started to go really mainstream, and, internet started to go really big, Wi-Fi, everyone started to be connected on games, right? And that was the big game changer, in my opinion, because what it set up was it set up this whole new interface for interaction and competition with people. And I think that's what a lot of the like really hardcore gaming addiction is centered around, right? Like there's very few people that, unless you're like a big Skyrim guy or you're playing like really modded stuff and you're like a really big diehard fan to that franchise, the big factor is competition with other people, right? And that's why it's like CS:GO, League of Legends, Dota, like those are the biggest games on the planet, because they have like the like quote unquote best simulations of competition. And this is where we could go a lot of different directions in. Continuing in the direction of the potential content addiction, this is a whole thing where you're watching content to get better so you can, play against people. And then there's also the parasocial relationship aspect with the content. You might watch a Minecraft YouTuber, you might watch a COD YouTuber a lot, to the point to where it's like you start getting that fake simulation of, or a pastiche of you having a relationship with them. And it's very one-sided, right? And that's a whole thing that we could extrapolate into. And then like continuing on the competition aspect as well, we could get into the fact that like nowadays, especially when we're talking about the power process in the real world, I mean, I hate to say it, guys, and I'm sure you'd probably agree with me, we don't really live in that meritocratic of a society, right? I mean, it's
Absolutely not.
it's a lot of back scratching, right? It's a lot of, getting down. It's very little about actually like having a very profound, amazing skill. You have to do a lot of dirty work. You have to be scratching backs in today's society. And I think video games and online competitive video games are kind of this peak expression of skill, right? To where, you put a certain amount of hours into a video game, you have a certain amount of intelligence. That's how good you'll be at this video game. And unlike, how many things can be manipulated in real life, right? And sure, you can cheat and manipulate things in video games. I think that's why a lot of young men are gravitating towards these competitive scenes in gaming. It's because, like young men like to do, they like to compete, right? And video games are simply one of the best and easiest mediums nowadays to compete.
Yeah, and I think it especially attracts um, the more disenfranchised people. I mean, we've
Mm.
brushed over the economic state that we face and a bunch of other issues, and that leads to a lot of escapism. And I think being able to have that competition, and I think a key factor of it that you hit right on the head was to be able to play with anyone from around the world. So you can now completely outsource your competitive instinct to people that don't matter to your immediate circle and your immediate circumstances, and that allows you to escape from your immediate circumstances. And rather than, I mean, we could take that to a lot of places, but it's really all about not being in the real world and about being in this fake world where you can have your competition and you can have fun, but it doesn't really matter. You're not refining anything beautiful about humanity. Like when you play 10,000 hours of League of Legends or 5,000 hours of Minecraft, it's a good time. But
Well,
I
the League
think
of Legends, you're
one
doing the opposite of refining humanity, actually.
one thing that I think has been very understated about this whole issue is just how much the introduction of, I will even go so far as just to say, entertainment, video games, television at such a young age impacts people. One thing that is important to understand, and you can verify this yourself, when you start watching television, with the graphics and the flashing colors and all the movement, and that's stimulation to the brain, that trains the infant mind to readily enter into a state called the alpha state or an alpha trance. This is easy to see in almost anybody. Just watch somebody, if you're sitting there watching TV or if they're on their phone, watch their face, and if their mouth falls slightly open, if their mouth just kind of hangs open, that is an indicator that they are in an alpha trance. Now, what an alpha trance is it is a very basic form of, I guess you could say, a hypnotic state. And what can happen then is that messages can sneak their way into the subconscious mind. And sometimes, unless you train yourself, you really won't even know. And so some people will be on their phone and you can just have a full conversation with them and them not hear anything. But rest assured, their subconscious mind did hear what you said. And so it's not uncommon for them to be like, uh, say something that you said, thinking it was their own idea a few minutes later, just because consciously they didn't hear you, but subconsciously they did. And so what this does is it almost trains the mind from such a young age to readily dissociate or to enter into a dissociative state. And now, as we're seeing, we've got so many people who are quite literally living in this dissociated state. The things that matter to them are just um, completely and utterly backwards. I mean, people will spend all this time on hobbies and video games and television, and all the while they're completely and utterly dissociated from the real world. And so what's happening is people are really being put into, with air quotes here, a matrix of sorts. It's like society and community is all moving into the realm of the internet and digital communications. And this is the case for myself and probably Prophet and Devon, is that we found a lot of community, some good, some bad. We found a lot of community in playing online games. We met a lot of interesting people, and one thing that I am thankful for is that I've had the chance to have conversations and talk to people from all over the world. I would meet people who are in Australia, New Zealand, and you have to be up late at night to talk to them, but you never would be able to do something like this 50 years ago. So it is got positives and negatives, but I think without understanding the negatives, without looking at this objectively, which is what the purpose of this episode is, without looking at this objectively and seeing that there are some side effects that we need to know about, I think it can spiral out of control, and that's what we're witnessing now.
No, yeah, absolutely. And I think continuing that, because it is a type of hypnosis that happens when people get very into games, or even if we start getting into scrolling, right? The doom scrolling phenomena that I'm sure anyone that even older people now, anyone watching this video, I'm sure at one point or another has been captured in a little doom scroll trance, right? Where you just realized, oh fuck, I just watched 20 shorts in a row and didn't even realize it, you know? And this type of hypnosis is becoming extremely prominent across the entire like diet, content diet of all people. And it's something that's really starting to make a very large impression across the population in general. And this is kind of the goldfish attention span phenomena that I think has been talked about for a little for a few years now. It's the fact that like so many people have such fucked attention spans and so few people are reading and so few people are actually like um dedicating a lot of conscious effort into things that content is being structured and formed in a way to that markets to people that have those lower attention spans. And that's a thing that, like, you know, you hear lots of people complain nowadays that TV shows suck and games suck and everything sucks, right? And I think that's because there's been a large shift, cultural shift, to content just really turning into slop, you know. And I think this is the whole thing with the fact that, you know, memes, the most popular memes I would say over the past 2 to 3 years has been the shit posting phenomena, where it's things are hilarious because they don't make sense, and absurdity has kind of um, taken center stage in the entire cultural dialogue of younger people. And it's really warping people's ability to like interface with reality correctly, because you know you either have someone whose brain is completely rotted with irony poisoning and is a content diet of, god forbid, Instagram reels or anything associated with that, or Facebook, or you know, you have the Fortnite kids whose brains are just, yeah, basically there's not many good mediums left. And especially with how few people read, it's just it's not getting good.
I think just real quick, and then I'll let you go ahead and talk, Prophet. I just wanted to let you know and the audience know. I think the next episode following this one we're going to do on irony poisoning, because I
Mm.
have a lot of information. I already wrote a show on that, and I think that is probably the next logical direction to take these. So go ahead, Prophet.
Yeah, yeah, good stuff. So I'd like to outline chronology for what you just said, Devon. And I think it goes directly with gateway or let's plays as a gateway drug young in your childhood. And in the beginning, it would eventually there was this style that we all know and love today that exists on TikTok, Instagram, YouTube, and it's the content creator style. And I think that started somewhat genuinely, like you had a good piece of content and now you're doing things to market it and certain things work in the algorithm. And on the other side of that, that trains young minds to get dopamine and look for this excitement in things that are overly exaggerated and essentially pastiche and fiat, like we were talking about with the one way relationships. And once that ingrained itself in a generation enough, we see that degenerating because you no longer need the quality content at the core as much if you've tuned the signals correctly, if you've said the intro correctly, if you're doing the right camera angle and have the right aesthetic, and so it's all become pastiche. And because that was imprinted so early in childhood, it's like it's become a switchboard where you can just and make sure to hit that subscribe button. If we hit 10,000 likes, like, kids have a trigger when people say that, you know what I mean?
With that being said, guys, make sure to hit that like button, follow us on all platforms. But I mean, I'm being for real. Definitely do all those things. It does help. But case
Yeah.
in point, exactly the reason I did that is because it is demonstrating the point perfectly. It is a trigger. It very much is a trigger.
Yeah, and they're just using those triggers more and more. whereas there's no content. Whereas before you'd still need the content. You'd still need good content. But we know with the slop that everything is becoming, like Devon mentioned, it's no longer good content. It just keeps the dopamine firing enough that they'll stay in that alpha trance watching that video until it doesn't fire enough.
And it's absolutely and another thing, we it's hard to fully understand, because I think that there's a lot of ego that goes into when people are conceptualizing these things. A lot of people say to themselves, "Oh, that's not happening to me. It's these things. I'm not susceptible to this type of subconscious manipulation." But like, I really hate to say it, but it does not matter. You could be running a 150, 160 IQ, right? You could be genius, like hyper genius level, top 0.001%, okay, on the population of intelligence. And you could still be getting manipulated through subconscious sexual manipulation, or like, everyone is susceptible to these things. And it is because it functions at the very most it functions at our very most primal instincts. Okay, like the want for competition, the want for community, okay, the want for potential physical or intellectual dominance upon people. All these things are based on extremely core pillars of the human psyche that function at a subconscious level, right? And that's why a lot of these algorithms backbones are based on evolutionary psychology. Okay, and like a really good example of the short form content stuff, to get into the mechanics of subconscious manipulation, is these things are set up as basic, like, as content slot machines, right? The reason why slot machines are so addictive, okay, they tell you the probabilities on the slot machines. Any person that understands probability knows that ringing the slot machine 1,000 times will lose you money 99 point whatever percent of the time. Okay, now the actual addiction lies within the slot machine mechanic that the short form content follows, where you might get 100 videos that you think are absolute dog shit garbage, right? But then you get that one video that makes you laugh your ass off. It's the same thing as hitting that jackpot on the slot. And if they were to give you amazing videos over and over and over again, and really have an awesome algorithm, then you wouldn't sit there scrolling for hours, right? And that's just one small part of subconscious manipulation, to keep you scrolling, to set you in a dopamine trance, right? Because a lot of people assume, oh, you might be watching that short form content because you like it, right? Or you might be watching that short form content because you're interested in that subject. But I would argue it's not even that half the time. It's just these processes of subconscious manipulation, and it's the ego telling you that, oh, it's just because you like it's the ego making sure that it doesn't get hurt by thinking, oh, I'm terribly addicted to this terrible shit that everyone's susceptible to, right? Because it's subconscious manipulation, right? It's just a defense mechanism. It's hilarious.
Exactly, and it allows people not to see the progression of these things. Because it's like, oh yeah, well, I know they're doing that, but do you really know the extent that they're doing it? Like, and they are digging deeper every day. You guys probably heard about this, but Coco Melon, the way that they make their content so mesmerizing to children is they will put a screen of something else, whether it be like nature or something less interesting, and then they'll put Coco Melon and they'll play it at the same time. And they will note every single time that child takes their attention away from Coco Melon for a single moment. And right there, that's where they'll know where to engineer and where to up the attention, or where to put a cutaway, or where to put a sound. Or so it really is away from creating good art, and it is just firing on the absolute most fundamental subliminal and subconscious signals they can to keep your attention
Let
and
me let
keep you
me
there.
let me go ahead and chime in real quick. Just a quick note. One thing that I'm curious as to find out, and it just dawned on me while I was listening to you. But now that they've got all these iPads in their hands and phones in their hands, with adults, what they'll do is they will literally study your behavior, and then they will tailor the content, aka the algorithm, to you as a person. And they do this through collecting insane amounts of background data. This is called telemetry. And essentially this has gotten better and better with time, and then AI comes in. Now, this is what I don't know, so don't take my word for it here. But I believe at one point that I heard that it may be technically illegal to do this, to tailor ads based on data collected for children. I'm not 100% sure. I would hope that it would be against the law. But if it's not, who's to say that some of these shows, for instance, let's say hypothetically, Coco Melon or whoever creates it, they can find some psychologist, researcher, and pay them a lot of money to figure out just exactly how to maximize the entrancement. I mean, that is what these psychologists do. They get paid a lot of money to tell big corporations, this is how much time you need to focus on this. This is how much time you need to focus on this. This is the angle that you need to show your product. Like, people get paid a lot of money for those fine details. And background data collection and AI make this insanely easy now. And the scary part is that I personally would bet that this algorithm probably knows most people better than they know themselves. They know what time you go into the snack drawer to get a bag of chips. They know what time you start to think of a snack. Like, it is deep.
Yeah, it absolutely. And there is many examples in recent history where companies will claim that their demographic, or I believe Mr. Beast is one of these who claimed his demographic was like 19 to 24, his majority of viewers, even though it's known that a majority of his viewers are like 6 to 12 or 6 to 14. So even if it is illegal, the companies are doing these things in spite of that. Don't think they aren't doing these things. And even if they aren't doing it with their American subsidiary, they're doing it with their Indian or Switzerland or Chinese subsidiary, wherever has looser laws. Like, in the global economy, it's much easier for big corporations to slip around specific legal legislation like that by simple corporate maneuvering, honestly.
They're making an aircraft carrier with billions of dollars of computers and microchips on it so that they can make an AI facility in international waters to get around all of the law that the G7 has set up for anti-AI regulation. It's pretty ridiculous. And
That's crazy.
and I think that it's interesting that the conversation has gone this way, and we could take this here for a little while, because this is a pretty large part of all of this, and we could honestly get in this side of it could be countless episodes, could be dozens of episodes, but how, economically lucrative doing all of this is, because I think that a big problem that a lot of people have at the end of the day when they really start digging into a lot of this stuff is their brains break under the complexity and the control of it all, and it immediately goes to a very conspiratorial outlook. And while the conspiratorial outlook a lot of the times is pretty aligned with what's happening in reality, you don't even need to take any conspiratorial outlook if you just like follow the money on what's happening with all of this. And for example, like right now, the focal point of all US investment is based off of these data farms and or the collection of this data. If you look at all of the largest companies on the US stock market, their interest and their business models are entirely aligned with this large scale collection of data, whether it's through social media, video games, and then through the sorting and using of this data, which is then the refinement of it, which is AI. We could get into NVIDIA and Facebook and Microsoft and all the cloud computation stuff. But really what I brought this up for is the fact that these things have become a lot larger. These things have now become the economy. Okay. Like if you look at how much market share all these corporations have relative to like any other portions of the economy, like you'd start to get kind of sick to your stomach. So it's like, this is a good example I like to give people. Like Walmart And of course, like valuations are based off of growth a lot of the time, but like Walmart is worth $788 billion in market cap, and like Facebook is worth 1.74 trillion. So you have Facebook basically worth 2 times more on a valuation perspective from Walmart. And it like, who knows how much more dominant Walmart is on a physical perspective. And that just shows you how valuable the elites and Wall Street kind of, it just shows you how valuable these companies are to them from the data farm perspective, that a company as big as Walmart, which basically dominates 70% of all US retail consumption, and all US retail consumption in the US being the largest point of consumption on the global economy on a dollar perspective, right? I mean, you get what I'm going at for here, right? Like the value at which Wall Street has and the government has for these companies is absolutely insane. And the one last example I'll make too, it's this valuation might change a lot over the next year, but even like Nvidia, right? I mean, since October 2022, Nvidia has added around $3 trillion, $3.1 trillion onto its market cap. Okay. So it's like, you know, you don't have $3 trillion flowing into a company if there wasn't some sort of very, even if it is a bubble, even if it goes to a trillion again, right? The fact that that even happened just shows the like psychological gravity, right, that the elites have around this idea of the data farm and this idea of building this AI around this, you know, content consumption.
Guys, I just want to chime in here. So those graphics that we put together, I'm going to put those up on the screen, and we can each comment on them, and then I've got 3 of them, and you guys can take as much time as you want if you have something to add on these. So the first graphic is from a Statista study, and it is the time spent playing games in the U.S. as of June 2024. So that's up on the screen now. What are you guys' opinions on this?
I mean, really, you have to, when you're looking at data like this, especially when it's become so normalized, you have to realize what 6 to 10 hours is. 6 to 10 hours is the average time someone spends 5 days a week at their job to sustain their living. So the fact that 21% of 18 to 29-year-olds are spending an equivalent amount of time on a game as their livelihood directly points to the point that we've been trying to make, that it goes back to escapism, and it goes back to abusing the neurology of human beings and keeping them away from the real world and keeping them in a pastiche world where they can have all the fun they want. I mean, 11 to 15 hours is crazy.
Is
And
that
I
per
know
week
people,
or month? I can't.
I believe it's per day.
Is it per day?
Yeah.
Yes, I believe that's per day, but let me verify
That
that.
has to be by week. That has to be by week.
I don't know. There's this guy at my work who has a kid, and he spends like all of
It
his
is
time on
it is
video
weekly.
games.
It is
Okay, I thought
Weekly,
so.
okay.
I thought
weekly
so.
time spent playing video games.
No,
according
weekly,
to
that is still
adults.
crazy though.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's still crazy.
Because even the 6 to 10 hours, if you're looking at that, like that's basically a fourth of a work week almost, right? A fourth or a fifth of a work week that people are spending like playing games, you know. Like that's a
Exactly.
lot.
And I mean, you have a life, you have friends, you probably
You
have a
sleep.
spouse, you work out, you sleep,
You
exactly.
sleep for 8 hours at least, 8 to 6 hours, right? That's like a
And I,
third of the day gone.
and I mean, the fact that the statistics don't go down when you hit 30 to 39 and only slightly go down in the 40s means that these hold up when you have children, which
Let me go
is
ahead
a
and
bigger problem.
just read like the summary of the study from Statista. It says, as of June 2024, 21% of U.S. adults aged 18 to 29 spent 6 to 10 hours per week playing video games. Overall, respondents from this age group were more likely than others to be heavy gamers. A total of 8% played video games more than 20 hours in an average week. In total, weekly gaming usage was more likely among younger adults in the United States. And
Yeah.
I'm going to go ahead and go to the next one, which is another study from Statista. This one is a breakdown of the worldwide revenue of the online gaming industry and the span is 2017 to 2027. And I'll figure out when the study was done.
Yeah, well, just a point on the last study. It would also add up that the younger generations are more likely to do this, or more likely to be high intensity gamers because they grew up with playthroughs and on YouTube, whereas the older generations are sort of later adopters. So they've become full on hobbies, and like with this revenue breakdown, it's obviously one of the biggest industries now. Um, you know, esports used to be a joke, and now it's just as serious as regular sports, essentially. Um,
I was surprised to hear that there are actually esports teams for schools now. Like they have an actual esports sports team. That's
yeah, that's crazy.
absolutely crazy to me. I mean, listen, I mean, I'm all for esports and whatnot, but it's weird because that was almost something that I could have never imagined when I was in school. Like, I mean, it would be nice, but it's like, okay, that's not really sports, haha. But it's like now apparently it is, and not all school districts have this, but
No, and I mean, as things become more expensive in the real economy, as just buying your kid a console once and one video game, or not one video game, but one video game, right, can be potentially hundreds of hours of playtime, right, and of occupation. It's just so much cheaper than paying for your kids' football practice, right, or taking them to soccer. It's become a thing where I think a partial reason why video games have become so popular and it's become such a dominant industry and it's seen so much growth is because not only because of its addictive tendencies, but also because of just its how easy and cheap it is, right? And it's just ease of access to most people. I mean, that's such an important factor that is like glossed over, and I don't think that video games would have become this large of a phenomena if it wasn't for the fact that, so many people are so, bad off financially.
Yeah, well, and a good example of that is my uncle put my cousin. He's like 14. He did water polo, and now he's going to the Junior Olympics. But um, for him to do that, like his wife had to take time off work, and he had to put time aside from his real estate business to do that. So, and he's way better off than a lot of other people in our family are living. So it really does take a good economic position, caring parents, because he is one of the best examples of a real parent these days that I've seen, to facilitate things that actually will grow your body and grow your real connections in the world. It is much easier just to buy him a Switch. And wouldn't you know it? My uncle doesn't let him on his Switch for more than an hour. I think it's like an hour a day and
Yeah.
2 hours on weekends. Like, that's fucking crazy to anyone who I would talk to.
now we have hindsight because a true defense for our parents would be this has never happened before. They couldn't have known, but a lot of people had this. I remember my grandparents always had this weird gut feeling that it was not a good idea, and they might have been right. And now we know, so we can now parent our children this way. But this next graph is the number of online gamers in millions and the country, to what country. So the number in blue is 2023, and then 2027 is forecasted. And this was actually very interesting. I just found this as I was looking through the previous slides, and it is actually shocking to me how China just has like this huge bubble. I mean, it's like the U.S. only has 100 million, maybe, and then China has 350 million.
Well, the US, that's still good though. I mean, that's like a relative ratio to population. That's like almost a third of China's population. That's almost a fourth or fifth of ours. We're around like 360. That's 75 million ish.
Right.
They have 1.4 billion. That's at like 360 million. So
So here's the
it's
question:
similar.
what is all the other countries, the UK, Japan, Germany, Australia, and Brazil? All of those countries are following behind the U.S. and China. Why do you think that it is the U.S. and China, and there's a big gap between all the other countries?
They're running the largest data farms
Yeah.
China and the US have the largest interest in creating, not the largest, they're the largest players in large language model creation, um, AGI pushing, they're the biggest players.
Prophet, do you have anything to add on this? I have one more, and it's just a headline, and I'm going to put all of these sources actually in the description. I'm going to do it after the stream ends, though, but you guys can check these all out. The next one is Apple to pay $95 million to settle a Siri listening case. That's from BBC. I'm not going to get into it just because we only have about 15 minutes left, but just the headline. This is not the only company that's been busted for things like this. It seems like it's almost a rite of passage now. If you want to be a big tech company, you got to spy on people, lie about it, and then get a fine for it. And they find it, in a business sense. They find it just, it's like you got to pay. It's okay. We got to speed, so let's just pay the traffic ticket. So they find it cheaper to just pay these settlements and continue to lie about it. And that's the way that they view these things. So it's not like the penalty, it's not like it will change anything. They'll just get smarter about it, and let's just pay it again if we need to.
Hey, well, you know what they say, if there's no recourse, it's the government taking its cut.
Very well said. Absolutely.
Yeah, exactly. And I think especially when you have industries like the data broking farm that make so much money, and they are basically supported by these bigger industries who, no matter what, are going to continue to need this data. So no matter what, these things are going to continue to function. And it's exactly a speeding ticket. When billions are at play, it doesn't matter that a lawsuit that probably took a year and a half to come to fruition, he has to pay, or they have to pay out 95 million, which really isn't anything to each individual person that it happened to. You know, it really is a drop in the bucket on these things.
And this really just gets into the thing I was getting into probably like 20 minutes ago in this conversation. This grip that these companies have on like our institutions, like the amount of money they're worth, the amount of power they have over our politicians, the amount of power they have over the policy the politicians pass. I mean, this is it's entrenched, and it's the reason why they're even able to get away with all these things and exploit children and the whole population to the extent that they do. And this is where I don't want to particularly get into like how crazy all this is. I would implore the viewer to look into it and just simply follow where all the money's going. I mean, if there is hundreds of billions of dollars worth of investment pouring into these companies who are basically all specializing on creating a more addicted American and Western populace to content, right? And the actual like content of the content, right, is complete trash, it's garbage, then I mean, you got to ask yourself, what is afoot here, right? What is the subtle manipulation potentially at play, right? And that's something that I'll leave the viewer to think about on their own.
It's all very well said. I think the last thing that we should really touch on is just the detriment of this infinite scroll, because I think that that has been kind of the revolution recently. That is a very new concept. And one thing I would like to note is that I don't even remember. This might have been about a week or two ago that TikTok was about to be banned. The amount of insanity, the way people were freaking out over it. That's what truly I would imagine if the government came and said we're banning all tobacco tomorrow, people would freak out like that the same way as they did for TikTok. And don't get me wrong. Go ahead.
If you can believe it, I was at work when that happened, and my manager, who has a child, she basically, you know how they do everything under a layer of irony, but you could see that she was not they were not screaming about it, but being over exaggerated about it. Oh my god! And when they weren't, you could see 3 or 4 people there up front were all had this 1,000-yard stare. It's like they didn't know what to do with themselves because we were slow. Where they'd usually get on their phone, they just didn't know what to do with themselves, and they weren't aware. It didn't look like they were conscious. It looked like they were just sitting there like a bot with no instruction. It was one of the craziest things to happen. Everyone in the grill, we were all talking about it for a couple hours. And I think that shows, just like you were saying, the level of depth that this addiction has. And the reason it can get to that level of addiction is tobacco is one thing. But you can only step away for 3 minutes while you have a cigarette and then you go back into work. But gaming, you can step away from your life. You can step away from feeling things about your situation. You can step away from improving yourself for hours and just be drugged up on your own mental chemicals.
Yeah, I think those are all absolutely valid points. It really has, and this is what is most frightening in my opinion. It is really becoming very common to see the endless scrolling just commonplace now. You know, you're sitting in a waiting room, you're sitting at work, and you don't have anything to do for a minute. It has just become a natural instinct to pull out the phone, go to, and I've caught myself personally. You know, there's TikTok, there's Instagram, there's now Facebook, and I've been so surprised to literally fall into a blind trap. I don't know how I got to that scrolling loop. Maybe I just clicked one video, and I was shocked at how I don't even remember getting there. And
It's
now I've been
trance-like.
absolutely listen. This is all hypnosis. It is not
Yeah.
hypnosis as in they depict in the movies. This is a very psychological, subtle hypnosis, and it's absolutely real. And you know, I could prove it beyond all shadow of a doubt. But the fact that people know what we're talking about, I just want people to understand this is absolutely hypnosis.
No, and that's where I think, to just connect a little bit with what I was talking about a second ago, that's where you can get, you can start connecting the dots, right? It's if this is hypnosis and if this short form content is doing a very good job at putting people in these trances, well, is that maybe a portion of what the algorithm is trying to, do? Is that maybe a utility function of the algorithm, right? And usually, if people are being hypnotized, there is a hypnotist, right? So that means that the algorithm is basically a hypnotist. And I mean, the algorithms aren't sentient yet. So that means that there is some sort of agenda behind the hypnotization, right? There
Well,
is some sort of action that hypnotist wants you to carry out, right?
absolutely. And something that doesn't necessarily exist with such transparency in the US and other Western states, but um, in China, if you sell a piece of software in China, you have to release the entire source code to the Chinese government. I'm pretty sure they have to approve it as well. Um, and what that points to is, especially in a society like China, where though their population's on TikTok, they will break up after a certain amount of time with math facts or, oh, you got to go outside now and play, where the algorithms are truly that curated and the algorithms aren't sentient and they have full access to the source code of everything being sold and produced in China and most likely from China because they're Chinese companies. Um, the governments do have power over this. And I'll leave it at that point, but it's not like the companies are just doing this by themselves and the governments are powerless or they haven't caught up. Like, they've caught up for sure.
Yeah, I think it's very important for people to at least understand, or you know what, let me rephrase that. I think it's at least very important for people listening, anyone to listen, if these are concepts that you have heard of before, or if you haven't heard of them before, you don't gotta like we don't have the one unique truth. All this should serve at is you should go and maybe pick around and do a little bit of research for yourself. It's so easy to find stuff on this. We didn't take much time to pull all of these graphics and these studies. It only took us maybe an hour to put all this stuff together and brainstorm and set it up. But at least look into these things for yourself, because you're going to be shocked at what you find, and it should scare you a little bit, because these are things that a lot of people, I don't think, if they knew the extent, they would not agree with this. But now we're at a point where I don't remember who said it, but these corporations, they absolutely, via their lobbyists, they will pay lobbyists, and that, according to Citizens United, is them, the corporation being a person, an entity, is exercising its right to free speech and to petition the government. And so through their lobbyists, these corporations gather their experts in these hotel conference rooms, and they write the bills that make it into Congress, because most of the people in Congress are geriatric. They're elderly. They really should be, and as a matter of fact, they just found a missing senator or congressperson in a retirement home with dementia. They didn't know they had no clue where she was, and they found her in a retirement home a few months later. And so you really think that these elderly people are up on Capitol Hill reading 10,000, and seriously, 10,000 page laws? No, they have assistants to do it, and the lobbyists are the one that are putting these together. Because if the lobbyist puts the bill together, the corporation knows exactly what they put in there, and so they leave themselves these little cheat codes. So, oh well, if we didn't leave a message before 9 a.m. on if it was a weekend, that doesn't, they know all the ways to get around these contracts. And so it absolutely is run by primarily these corporations. The more money you have, the better seat at the table you get. So that is called a plutocracy. And absolutely, I personally, again, not saying I know the truth, I personally would say plutocracy is one of the best descriptions for the system we're living under now.
And just to sprinkle some toppings on top of Urban's point right there, everyone, I would urge for you to look through Citizens United versus the FEC, the Federal Election Committee, because that's probably the funniest. It's one of the funniest determinations of the Supreme Court in a long time. I'll just read a little snippet from it here. So in 1976. In Buckley versus Vallejo, they determined that limiting a corporation's ability to spend money is unconstitutional by limiting the ability of its members to associate effectively and to speak on political issues. So in that hearing in 1976, the Supreme Court established from then until now, right, and until it gets overturned, pray to God, right, that money is directly associated, your spending of money, right, whether it's to a politician, whether it's with anything, your spending of money is directly associated with your right to freedom of speech. Creating it, literally, the spending of your money as a constitutionally protected right under freedom of speech.
It is a joke. Prophet, what's your opinion? And we're nearing the 1 hour mark, so we'll go ahead and get our final thoughts and wrap it up.
Yeah, just a little whipped cream to add on top of those toppings. In the US, companies are defined as legal persons. They are legally persons. There's a different term, and I forget it off the top of my head, for a flesh and blood person, which also falls under the category of illegal persons. But yes, in a lot of ways, I'm sure they can't vote and do certain things like this, but in a lot of ways, companies are legally considered people, which I'm sure contributes to so many of those cheat codes and loopholes in bills and different legislation.
On the subject of contract and contract law, there's been a giant discounting of it because of the sovereign citizen movement. And here's the deal: contract law is absolutely a way to subjugate and control others. And there is something to that studying of contract law. However, it is also very important to realize that no matter what, when you go into a courtroom, the law is not the law. The law is whatever the judge and the lawyers say the law is. So don't go in there thinking that you've got a legal dictionary and that you are going to do anything for yourself, because the law is whatever the judge says the law is. And if they don't like you, they'll put you in jail no matter what. So understand that contracts are very powerful tools and that they have been used against us. But you're not going to have any success fighting these things unless you have a giant legal team. And probably you're going to only have luck in civil cases. And I've yet to see many that really work, just because the deck is stacked against you. But contract and contract law and words and terms are very important.
Yeah, and that's why, and I think after I say this, we should probably get to wrapping it up, because this could be a whole nother
Fair, that's fine.
this could be a whole another episode, to be completely honest, when we begin to all the contract and the esoteric symbolism in contracts. But it really is a thing to where the way that this corruption has spread throughout the legal system and in the practice of law in the West is through these establishing of these false precedences. And I think that especially when you get further away from these rulings, I mean, at the time, there might have been a legitimate reason for them to establish that ruling in 1976. But if you look at the fruits of that precedent over the past, 4 decades, it's been pretty terrible. So we should probably try and reestablish things. That's why this extreme adherence to these, very defined set of precedences, some that are still held up since the mid 1850s. It's a very bad way to look at law. I mean, in my opinion, it's the same thing as holding up similar philosophical or mathematics standards that we had in the 1800s, early 1900s, right? I mean, it's a very destructive way that people interpret the legal system still, in my opinion.
Prophet, do you have anything left to say?
Yeah, honestly, I think just to wrap it up, all of these issues that we've covered are things that you can see in your life, that you can pretty easily research, and that you can most importantly see in yourself. If you're being honest with yourself, you should be able to outline how these things have affected you and to what extent they've affected you and your family members. And the lengths that we drew out some of these causes and some of the background factors that contribute to this environment that we find ourselves in. I just want any viewers to consider those things if they can, and kind of let them marinate, because if you let it marinate, I think the connections will only strengthen and your doubts will either become valid points of contradiction where we missed something, which we're human beings, or you'll become more informed and you'll have a more accurate way of looking at the world. So that's where
Very
I'd
well
leave it.
said. Very
So,
well said.
guys, I hope you guys enjoyed this discussion, but I'm just going to go ahead and offer a little bit of a teaser / preview. So we want to have some guests on this show. That's going to become a major part of this show, but we're just getting into a groove, so we haven't done it yet. But the first guest we're going to have will be on Monday. That will be the next show. We're going to have Pastor James Carner come on. And the reason I asked him to be the first guest was because the next show is going to be on irony poisoning. And he had presented a show that I wrote on irony poisoning. And so I thought it would be fitting to inaugurate our first guest show with him, since he's presented it and he's talked about this before, and he's also helped me a great deal by offering me the chance to guest host for him. And so that kind of segued my way into starting a podcast with my two buddies. But that is going to be on Monday. That'll be, I think we're going to do it at 10 a.m. and that'll be on the West Coast. So that'll be 1 p.m. on the East Coast. And it'll be a very interesting show. But with that being said, guys, we appreciate your time, those who joined in to listen. I know we're on a handful of platforms, and it'll eventually go up on Substack and also Spotify as an audio version. But we truly appreciate every one of you, because We're not necessarily concerned with a huge audience, because at least the way I view it is that everyone who needs to hear what we're going to say, they will be here regardless. They'll be put here, they'll be brought here. But if it's 5 people, 10 people, if it's 72 people, they'll hear what they need to hear.
Absolutely.
Yeah, all right, everybody. Thank you for listening. God bless, and short Bitcoin.
Have a good day, guys.
Thank you all. Have a good one.